It's late December 2024. Christmas is now all but a distant memory. Most of the leftovers from Christmas Day have probably already been eaten. And New Year is just over the horizon, which can mean only one thing. It's time for my annual roundup video, where we get to take a look back at some of the events of the past 12 months here at Mark Motoring, and stick around to find out which was my number one car reviewed of 2024. So to those of you who are long-term supporters of the channel, welcome back. Any viewers who are new here, welcome to Mark Motoring. This is a great opportunity in this video to take a look back at some of the things that you might have missed over the past 12 months here. These sort of videos, I will admit, don't always do especially well because they're not the kind of thing that people are actively seeking out on YouTube. But as I say, it's something that I enjoy doing, and I know some of you do enjoy seeing them as well. So, this year, to try and keep the video a bit shorter than last year's video, which last year's video I was very pleased with, but it ran at something like an hour long, so we want to keep it a little bit shorter. So I'm not going to go into as much detail on some of the events that have become staples of the channel that I do year in, year out. Things like Walton Classic Car Show, for example, that's been a staple right from the early days of Mark Motoring. Things like Weighton Wolds Classic Car Show, which was a fantastic event again, and back in 2023 it actually was my number one event of the year. I've also attended a few of the French car events again that I've done the last few years, such as Brooklyn's French Day, and of course Simply French down at Beaulieu. But what I really want to shine a bit more of a spotlight on is some of the events that was new for Mark Motoring in 2024. Now the first one was actually a new event on everybody's calendar this year, and it was a hugely successful event. Now to many of you this will come as no surprise, but that event was Rustyville. So March 2024 I actually taxed the Megane Coupe, again specifically to make sure that I got to this show. Now this event obviously had substantial backing. It was a collaboration between Hubnut with Ian Seabrook and Carly Spencer. We had Matt Richardson of Furious Driving, Steph Holloway of iDriver Classic. We had people like Matt Pink involved, and obviously a large number of people, no doubt, behind the scenes, and the British Motor Museum, who worked tirelessly to ensure that this new event was a huge success. And it certainly did pay off. Now, my expectations of my own video on this event were quite low actually, and the reason being is, like other huge events such as Festival of the Unexceptional, I would say probably 1 in every 10 person walking around seems to be a YouTuber or a creator of some sort, so the event does obviously get a huge amount of coverage. That said, I'm pleased to say that turned out to be one of my most successful videos of 2024. And it was a great event. Any of you that attended will know what a great atmosphere this event was. And we had such a diverse selection of cars. In fact, the whole ethos of this event was that anybody could turn up in virtually any car and you would be universally accepted. There would be no prejudice towards anyone or any vehicle. And this really did ring true. I mean, we had things like a Trabant, a 2-stroke East German car made out of, I think it was Duraplast, with a gravity-fed fuel system. Really were about as crude as cars could get. But obviously anyone living in an Eastern Bloc country, you know, through to the end of the Cold War, a car was a real privilege. And I'm pleased to say there's a real cult following for vehicles like this today. At the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we had James of JM, who many of you will know, who actually turned up in a modern Ferrari. And again, I would say that car got no more or no less attention than anything else at the event, and there was no prejudice directed at either end of the scale. There was also lots going off on stage, people talking, although admittedly I didn't really cover that in my video because I wanted to look at many of the vehicles that were there on display and try and get in a few interviews, as always, with some of the owners. One such owner I did manage to catch up with was Davey of Scottish Car Enthusiasts and Trains TV, with his Mark V Ford Escort, a very low mileage car that had a very interesting story behind it. And Davey actually drove that car all the way down from near Edinburgh, all the way down to the British Motor Museum, so a substantial amount of ground covered to get to that event. And people really did travel from far and wide to go to Rustival. Of course, there were lots of other interesting cars covered as well in there, and if you haven't seen that video already, yeah, I definitely highly recommend you do check that one out, because as I say, there was a lot included in that video. Just before we move on from Rustival, I'd also like to mention there is a Facebook page for Rustival and quite a community growing around that event now. And in fact, on the way home, I actually pulled off into a service station, and the car park in the services was there was an entire row of cars that were pretty much all cars from Rustival, and many of us ended up sort of chatting. I think I was chatting for a good 30-40 minutes to an owner of another vehicle just in the car park. Went inside, ended up finding someone to sit down with and have a burger with after a very long day at the show. So it was almost like the Rustival after party, and I think as far as things go in the car community, you really can't get much better than that. Now, another new event for this year saw me return to the Great British Car Journey. Now, anyone who's familiar with the Great British Car Journey, they've got a museum with a fantastic selection of cars, and they've also got something called Drive Dad's Car, where you can actually book to go and drive some of the vehicles that they exhibit there, which is great, because how many museums do you know where you can actually rock up and actually touch the exhibits, let alone take them for a spin around the site. The event in question was Voitures Françaises, and again, that video actually did quite well early on this year. We dropped really well on the day. In fact, to say it was so early in the year, I struggled actually going down there, because when I had the sunroof open to try and get a bit of air into the car, I could actually feel myself burning with the sun beating down, and this was like 8 o'clock in the morning, so yeah, unseasonably warm that day. And it did for, again, a new event at that site. New events always take a little bit of getting off the ground. You're not necessarily guaranteed a really large turnout. But we did have a good turnout and a good diverse range of vehicles, and vehicles from a wide selection of clubs, not just Renault, Citroën and Peugeot derived clubs, but we also had Matra and Simca there as well, amongst others. And again, a really, really interesting day. I spent time chatting with people, looking around some of the vehicles. As always, managed to miss quite a lot of the vehicles that were there, but that's just the nature of some of these larger shows. And again, a very sort of casual atmosphere, and obviously when you paid for your entry to this event, it got you access to the museum as well. And it's always great to go and have a look around these places, and obviously some of the exhibits do change from time to time, so even if you've been before, it's always nice to go and have another look round again. Now, over the past couple of years, the Classic Motor Show at the NEC has been one of those events that's a staple of the calendar here at Mark on Motoring. But this year I actually attended another very similar event that falls much earlier in the year. That, of course, was the Practical Classic Car and Restoration Show, which falls in March. Now, previously, as I say, I've not attended this because I thought, well, it'll be very similar to the show at the end of the year, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to go all the way down to the NEC twice in the year. But at the last minute, I had a slight change of plan. I went down on the Sunday, which is typically one of the quieter days towards the obviously sort of the last day of the show, and it was a great day out. The atmosphere actually I enjoyed, because it was a lot quieter than the November show. Found it much easier to walk around and film, and again, the range of exhibits that were there, it probably weren't on quite the same scale. It was a big show, but not as big as the November show. but as I say, the range of things that were on display definitely made it worthwhile going. Just like in November, we had lots of cars being exhibited there that weren't actually having any work done on them. There was just being displayed as classics, which was nice to see. But there was also some vehicles that were being worked on. So for example, I had a chat with some people on a stand that was working on a Ford Puma. In fact, they were doing a project that I think they've brought to the show before, and they keep sort of doing a bit on, and that car were getting nearer completion. So they were actually doing a racing Puma. They had other vehicles on there as well, like they had a Fiesta base courier van with a Puma front end on, which some of you may have seen before. And it was great. I had a chat about the work that they'd done and that was still being done on the vehicle. And of course there was other vehicles that were much older as well, so I got to see some sort of pre-war design cars where they were actually doing sheet metal work over an old ash frame, and I got to have a bit of a chat about that process and show some of what were being done. And I thought it was really interesting to see some of these skills actually being done right there in front of my eyes at the show. Normally I would only get to see that sort of thing by searching for such videos on YouTube, for example. So as I say, that made for a great day out, and just the whole atmosphere was such a relaxed day, which is great, because some of these shows can be quite exhausting, as much as we do all enjoy them. Now, another event that has been running a while but that was completely new to me was the Classic Car Night at the Humber Bridge. Now, these run quite regularly through the summer months, but I think they're typically a Friday night, which I'm usually at work. But again, I got a particular Friday where I wasn't at work, and I thought, right, I'm going to take the opportunity and I'm going to go see what this event's all about. And I was so glad I did, because this is a sizable car meet. So the public car parks there that they have at the north end of the Humber Bridge, just off the A63, sort of three pretty large car parks, and they more or less filled the site out. It's a really well organised event as well. They actually have food vans there as well, and ice cream vans, and burgers, chips, that sort of thing. So you can go make an evening of it, and if the weather's good, which it was that particular day, just a really enjoyable event to have a walk around. As I say, again, you can have a chat with people. Not just a big selection of cars, there was a good selection of classic motorcycles as well. I actually got chatting with a chap who had a Yamaha FS1E, or better known as a Fizzy to many back in the day, which is a sort of a little moped. And these things are just as sought after as some of the big, the larger, more powerful bikes are. And it was right in there amongst all the other motorcycles, and they were actually attracting quite a bit of attention. Quite a few people saw them and were instantly getting flashbacks to the youth. Anyone who was sort of coming of age in the late 70s or early 1980s would probably remember those bikes very well. Tried my best to balance, obviously, my enjoyment of the event and trying to get as much of it on camera for you as I could. And to be honest, I reckon I could have probably gone to that show every Friday that it was on throughout the year and still not covered every vehicle that was attending. I mean, they even got a Kenworth truck that I've seen before that rocked up that I didn't get round to, which again I would like to have a look at in more detail if the opportunity was to arise. Now, sadly, not every event was warm and dry like the ones that I've mentioned so far. Went to Lock Park, and we had the typical British summer weather, where it rained quite a lot early summer in 2024, and Lock Park was again quite a large classic car event, one that I've heard a lot about in the past and thought I'm going to have to make the effort to go. So Lock Park is in Barnsley, a huge public park that a couple of times a year is given over for a classic car show. And I wasn't disappointed when it came to the range of vehicles that were there. Again, nicely organised, well laid out event, and a lot of it in very interesting vehicles. Sadly, a lot of the owners spent much of the day sheltering in the cars, but between the rainstorms I did get an opportunity to get around quite a lot of vehicles at that event. And the weather really didn't dampen anyone's spirits. There was a heck of a lot to see there, and yeah, it's an event I would consider doing again. And it was, of course, an opportunity to catch up with a few friends from the local classic car clubs, and fellow YouTuber Simon from Smashing Pistons and his entourage, who seemed to be having a good day of it there as well. But as far as events go, there was one that for me stood head and shoulders above all others. It was an event that came right at the very beginning of this year, and it was an event that differed greatly from everything else that I've attended. So it probably weren't the largest event of the year based on numbers of people attending. It was in fact Raid Tan Hill, which I was invited along to by my friend Ben from the Citroen Car Club. The event though was actually an event by Lesiboo, a Leeds-based 2CV group, which I believe are affiliated with 2CVGB, and they put on this event every year, and it departs from Leeds, heads out to Hawes and then over the Buttertubs Pass, before finishing up at the highest pub in Britain. Now, this event did present some rather unique challenges for me from a filming point of view. So obviously I was up early that Sunday morning to get over to Ben's house with all my gear and get packed and away in his 2CV Bamboo. Got to the meeting point, again tried to get there in good time so that I would be able to capture some of the vehicles which were arriving for that event. I also got to have a chat with one of the representatives from that club about the event and what would be going on that day. I also had to obviously overcome the challenges of filming en route, so that involved obviously getting plenty of drive-by shots of the convoy passing through various points of the route, capture some of the route itself, the various stop-off points along the route. All this of course in addition to some of the footage that was filmed in or from the car while en route. On the short stop-off at Hawes I did manage to get another interview with a couple that had travelled down a considerable distance in their AK, a 2CV derived van that had previously been used by Air France, so that was quite an interesting vehicle with a very interesting history. As I say, we then headed over Buttertubs Pass to the highest pub in Britain, and just before we left there it actually started snowing. Now at this point Ben turned to me and said, "Oh, you've not driven a 2CV before, have you?" and presented me with a set of keys to his car. So a 2CV is a little bit different to most of the vehicles that I've driven. In fact, that's probably not strictly true. The 2CV is different to every other vehicle that I've ever driven. Bear in mind, I've driven two-wheeled vehicles right up to large trucks with 16 forward gears and other complex systems that you don't find on regular cars. And the 2CV did feel quite alien, and I'll admit it took me probably a good 20-30 minutes to actually get used to this vehicle. So you've got a hockey stick gear change that comes out of the dashboard, you've got no synchromesh on first gear, and you've got an engine that doesn't have a great deal of power and torque. Now most of us are taught to drive with a degree of reservation and mechanical sympathy. In other words, you don't drive cars flat out, and you certainly don't go barreling flat out into corners. But with a 2CV things are a little bit different, because sometimes you have to drive it a little bit like that to actually make any progress, because when you've got steep hills and hairpin bends, well, if you don't go around them quick enough you potentially come into a dead stop, and coming to a dead stop in a 2CV and getting going again perhaps isn't the most enjoyable of experiences. Another thing I found very, very strange in that car was that when you got going a bit quicker and you sort of ploughed into a bend, the steering actually weights up becomes a lot heavier, just by the design of the car's suspension and steering, which again does feel very strange compared to other cars that I've driven. But it was about an hour into that journey home as the light was fading, where I was really getting into my stride with that little car, and where Ben had the realisation that he probably wasn't going to be driving his car again that day. And in fact I ended up driving the vehicle all the way back to his house, which was a good hour and a half to 2 hour drive. And as I say, I was just getting more and more comfortable with that vehicle the more I drove it, and it was fantastic fun. There's someone once said to me that there's a great bit of satisfaction to be had by driving a powerful car slowly, and the same can certainly be said for making swift progress in a car with very little power at all. That's something that the 2CV delivers in spades. Lots of fun for a minimal amount of performance. Now my fun was actually getting cut a little bit short because as time went on I was actually catching up with and being held up by modern traffic on that route as we headed down through North and into West Yorkshire. What really made this event so special, and my number one event of 2024, was just the fact that I was out with one of my mates having a good laugh, and we really did laugh. We just were like a couple of teenagers giggling most of the day, to be honest. As I say, as we drove through some fantastic scenery, bombing around in this little car. It's an experience that just differed so greatly to every other event that I've done. Certainly anyone who's got a 2CV or a Diane or an Ami, there was even a DS, to be honest, out on that event. And you have the opportunity to go and attend that event, and you've got a car that's on the road in the winter months. Don't hesitate, just go and do it. It's an event that's been run year on year, so it's very well organised. And just a fantastic day out, and it's just the thing that you need to chase away those winter blues. So at this point I actually want to move on from events and have a chat about the cars that have been driven on the channel this year. So these are the videos that have been edited and released to the public between January and December of 2024. So bear in mind there are videos that have not only been filmed and awaiting editing, but we've got videos that have been out for early release to channel members, such as the 1985 Honda City Turbo 2 with its matching Moto Compo motorcycle that fits in the boot. A very interesting car, and again, if you do want early access to videos like this and other exclusive content, from £2.99 per month, you can become a channel member and enjoy this and other perks. So obviously I will leave some links in the video description if you fancy checking that out for yourself. So we've driven a variety of different vehicles on the channel this year. There's things like Ben's 2CV, for example, which weren't really a car review, but it was a car that I've driven and enjoyed very much. In fact, to be honest, I've enjoyed every car that's featured on the channel this year in some way or another. Of course, it's just that some have stood out in particular ways above the rest. Now, I don't necessarily have any hard and fast rules on what is driven on the channel. Cars get offered and I try and get around to filming them in due course. Now, obviously there are channels out there like Hubnut that tend to feature the more maligned cars that perhaps weren't so popular in the day, or that history's been rather unkind to, but where there is a following out there for said vehicles, and it's great that cars like that do get in the limelight. The other end of the scale, well, you've got people that only feature the most expensive, luxurious, performance-oriented vehicles. Here at Mark on Motoring, well, the cars that really get me excited, really, it's the ones that got away. It's those exciting cars, those aspirational cars for the masses, that the working classes like myself really wanted to own back in the day, and perhaps if we worked hard, saved up, we might just be able to get behind the wheel of one of those cars that could be just within our grasp. Now, there were some cars I featured on the channel that it would be a very slim argument to say that they fit that ethos. One being the 7th generation Chevrolet Corvette that I've driven on the channel back in the summer. Now, the reason I say it's a slim argument is, well, yeah, it is pretty much a supercar, and at 70 odd thousand pound, well, it's the car that I certainly won't be rushing out to buy anytime soon. However, if you compare it to some of the competition, well, it's an absolute bargain, and it was a car that was very enjoyable to drive. As with any car, there are certain pitfalls, left-hand drive only in the UK, and yeah, perhaps not really suited to some of our tighter country lanes. But again, a car I very much enjoyed nonetheless, and I was very grateful to its owner Arthur, who let me drive the vehicle. In fact, he actually brought me a nice shiny clean car out on what turned out to be one of the wettest days of the year. He brought me a car that had plenty of fuel on board, and I got to take it down a runway at over 100 miles per hour, as well as taking it out for a gentle drive around the local countryside. And Arthur actually ended up going home with a car that was plastered in road grime and with the fuel warning light on, as it happened, by the time I handed it back. And yeah, it was fine with that. It was just happy to get the car featured on the channel, and I was more than happy to feature it. It's not the first car I've had from Arthur, and I'm hoping that it's certainly not going to be the last of his fleet that I'll feature. But as I say, this is one of the vehicles I've driven, but sadly this year that can't be my car of 2024. It's yeah, it's probably just a little bit too high up there to fit in with this channel ethos. Another car I've driven that's yeah, perhaps a little bit too expensive for most of us. What I would see more as a house deposit, a substantial house deposit than a car, would be the current generation Land Rover Defender that I've had access to. Now again, I'm very grateful to the owner who provided me that vehicle. I only had it for a few hours, so I couldn't really take it into the deepest depth of the countryside to do any really serious off-roading. But then, most people who buy these cars probably don't do that either. So I got to take the car out locally. There are some little dirt tracks not far from me, and I did get to test the car on quite a steep embankment, just to see if it's the kind of thing that you know, someone who doesn't have a great deal of off-road experience you know, can drive in that situation. And yeah, I was suitably impressed. But again, if you want to learn more about that vehicle, do check that video out. It was released to the public very recently. In fact, I think it was one of the most recent videos on the channel at this point. These are probably immensely popular vehicles. I'm sure there'll be plenty of them out there on the road. It's been quite a successful Land Rover, but again, it's just not the kind of thing that's going to be my vehicle of the year. Now, a car that you actually saw very early on in the year that is more up my street would be the original Ford Puma, by which I mean not one of these little Fiesta-based SUV things that Ford call a Puma these days. In fact, in that video I actually said, oh, let's hope that Ford don't ever resurrect the Capri. And yeah, look what happened there. Been quite the controversial topic in recent months. But no, the original Puma was a car that I remember very well, been released back in the day, that had great reviews. You know, a lot of the motoring press really raved about that car, and in fact I think it was Top Gear's car of the year in period as well. So again, just shows how far the apple has fallen from the tree with Ford in recent years. But yeah, I got to finally drive one of those cars, and it was the 1.7 litre version as well, which anyone who knows the old Ford Puma, that is the one that you want. So I was very grateful to Paul, who loaned me that vehicle. That video initially got quite slow uptake, but yeah, started to pick up a little bit in recent months. It was the silver colour that I always remember. The one in the advert in period with Steve McQueen was silver, but this was a slightly later car, so the wheels were a bit different. And again, it had a few other bits, so it had the optional leather upholstery in there as well, and a few other little niceties. And it was a great driving little car, that very much harnessed by its humble underpinnings, which was of course a Ford Fiesta, but Ford really were masters of sort of reinventing what they already had, and the Puma was one of the best handling cars of its day. Little front wheel drive car, very forgiving to drive, but just had that little bit of sparkle. And again, even though the Fiesta origins weren't all that well hidden, you climb behind the wheel, the dashboard that you see is Ford Fiesta. There's no hiding that, but yeah, as I say, Ford were great at making something quite special out of a very regular run-of-the-mill car, and it's such a shame that manufacturers don't build cars like that anymore, because they were very, very popular in period, and obviously for good reason too. That would certainly have been a contender for my number one car of 2024. They're still not that expensive. Yeah, and as I pointed out in that video, the smile on your face would have certainly lasted a lot longer than the tan that would have faded from that package holiday you could have had for similar money. Another vehicle that would be a contender for the very same reason is a car that I actually didn't go to film as a car review. So in February I had a trip up to see my friend and fellow Renault enthusiast Joe, who's got quite a few old Renaults. The real reason I went up there, well, is I went to spend my Christmas and birthday money and pick up a few parts from a Megane Coupe that he was breaking at the time. So I had a ride up and we had a bit of a chat with Joe on camera, a look at a few of the vehicles that he had on his fleet that I'd not already featured, that I'd not seen before, and it just so happens that he'd very recently added to his fleet a 2 litre 16 valve Megane Coupe, so same body style as mine, but it's the hot one, the one with the clear Williams derived F7R engine. That people in the know, that's the car, that the Megane that people really want. These cars are actually quite scarce because unfortunately the cars launched and they were never really that collector's car from day one that the clear Williams or the Renault Spider is. So when these cars became older and less valuable, a lot of them got pulled apart and made into track cars, or the engines were taken for clear Williams, because as I say, the F7R, it's the same engine but with a slight different designation. I think they have different cams on a clear Williams or some of the subtle changes, but essentially if you need an engine for a clear Williams, it's a good starting point. Now, though I've not yet driven a clear Williams, I've always suspected that the Megane Coupe would probably be the slightly better drive with that engine, much in the same way as people often say that Peugeot 309 GTI is a better all-rounder than a 205 GTI, even though the 205 is by far the more valuable car these days, and the desirable one that everybody seems to want. So basically Joe was pulling off a few parts for me, and he handed over the keys to his 2 litre 16 valve Monaco Blue Megane Coupe. Well, I felt like a kid at Christmas. It was like all my Christmases and birthdays had landed at once. And best of all, where Joe's located up in the Northern Pennines, I was straight onto some prime driving roads. And in fact, if you didn't know any different, I could have been in the Alps. There was actually snow capping the hillsides around there, and obviously watching out for any icy patches on the road. I had roads that were almost deserted, and I really couldn't have picked a better location. Now, I'd not gone to film a proper review, so I couldn't film it quite in the style of a full car review, although I have done a review on my own Megane Coupe in the early days of the channel. But it was just great to go out and capture on camera what it was like experiencing this vehicle, and it was most enjoyable. If you haven't seen that video already, go back to early on in the year and do check that one out, because as I say, I certainly enjoyed driving that car quite a lot. So yeah, that's one to watch. Being that I own a Megane Coupe myself, and it's sort of my teenage dream car, you might think that would be my number one car of 2024. And in many ways it's got the credentials. It's as I say, it's a car that's great to drive. It's certainly very quick, and even though they're incredibly rare these days, they're not cars that are mega expensive. They are accessible to most people if you can find one. Now, one thing I hadn't expected with this car is how different it would ride to mine. My car actually is quite capable in the bends. It doesn't weigh a lot. It's got a very stiff body structure, but it does ride very smoothly. It goes over speed bumps and level crossings with composure that most modern SUVs just can't compare to. The 2 litre 16 valve coupe though, well, that is a very different animal. It might be a 90s car from an era where cars generally did ride very well, but it is very stiff, and I'm talking even by modern standards. To the extent I actually bumped my head while driving that car. Now, back in 1996, Clarkson did review a Megane Coupe, a Capsicum Red 2 litre 16 valve on Top Gear, and he actually drove that car with a sponge on his head. Now, personally at the time I thought he was just being a bit of a Burke and overemphasising that the car was reasonably firm by the standards of the day, and I thought, well, if you do put a guy that's, you know, best part of 6 foot plus in height in a Megane Coupe, well, you're asking for trouble. But having driven one myself now, well, yeah, maybe the sponge was quite justified, because, as I say, the ride is incredibly firm, and one thing that stops that car becoming my number one of 2024, other than it being just too obvious for this channel, is the fact that if I had to drive that car, say, over Buttertubs Pass, or any other sort of badly scarred mountain pass type road, I don't know whether I could endure that kind of punishment. As I say, great car. I would still love to have one on the fleet above pretty much anything else, but I've got to be honest, it's compromised. It is far too firm. So what does that leave us with then that could be my car of the year? What else have I driven in 2024? Well, I did have a short spin around the block in a vehicle which featured in one of my recent members vlogs, which was Paul Cunningham's Renault Rodeo 5, which is actually a Renault 4 based car. Now, the Rodeo 5, a bit like a Citroën Mahari or a Mini Moke or something like that. Essentially, it's the floor pan of an existing vehicle with a body that looks scaffolding and modified bodywork. A car I actually really enjoyed, and as a channel members, there is a vlog video out there which does feature this car, but again, it wasn't filmed in a way that I could really use as a standalone car review. Again, great fun, but slightly compromised, I suppose, in some respects for everyday use in Britain. Now, the car that has to be my number one for this year has got to meet certain criteria. It's got to be relatively affordable, it's got to be relatively practical and usable, and it's got to have that spark. It's got to have something that sets it above all others. It's in the way it drives. So, without further ado, my number one car of 2024, which I pretty much knew, to be honest, from the moment I drove it, is the Mazda MX-5 RF, which was kindly loaned to me by Callum. So, it's a modern car, and as many of you know, I've sort of fallen out of love with modern cars a little bit in recent years, so it may come as a surprise that I've given it my top slot this year. Well, the reason being, well, primarily, is that car has restored my faith in modern cars. It's a car that you sink into the seat, everything is close around you, all the controls, you can touch the steering wheel with your thumb and the top of the gear lever with your little finger, all in one fell swoop. It's certainly not the most spacious of cars. You're not going to be going on a family holiday in it, but for two people, yeah, well, you can fit two of you and just enough luggage to go off on a holiday. In fact, Callum did drive across Europe in that very car. The RF version, again, that's the sort of hardtop, folding hardtop version of the MX-5. You can obviously save yourself a little bit of money and a little bit of weight and get the complete ragtop version, the more traditional style of MX-5 if you so wish. But whichever one you buy, I imagine it's a car you're not going to go wrong with. Now Callum's was the 2 litre car, so you got more power and you also got firmer suspension on that car as well. The car wasn't by any means excessively firm, it's certainly a car you could live with, but there is a 1.5 litre version which I'm told is a great revvy little engine, much in the same character of the 2 litre, just with 130 horsepower instead of the 150 or 190 odd respectively, depending which version of the 2 litre you buy. It's a car that won't fail to make you smile. It's the kind of thing that you can rock up at a car meet, people will respect your choice. You can rock up at the supermarket, people won't look at you like you're a complete Burke. It's also a car that is relatively kind on your wallet. Now okay, I did comment on the video that if you really wanted to spec up an MX-5 new, you could spend quite a lot of money, and I didn't think it was worth spending that sort of money on. But certainly even an entry-level spec car or a good used example, I think would make an excellent buy. You're going to get the renowned Japanese reliability. You've actually got a fantastic normally aspirated engine in a world where everything else is turbocharged. Mazda stuck with a normally aspirated engine, and they've got a car that an engine that is really fruity, that really has that zest about it when you rev it out. But likewise, it's got enough torque at the lower and mid-range for the car to be usable. What really surprised me when I drove that car is that under the filming conditions where I was doing a lot of stop-start driving, setting down a passenger with a camera to film drive-by shots for example, zipping past in a low gear, trying to get those shots with the exhaust note as the car as it whizzes by. None of this is conducive to great fuel economy. But that said, by the time I finished filming, that little 2 litre sports car had returned 40 miles per gallon. I think that's remarkable. I've got a family hatchback that doesn't, that would struggle to do that certainly under those conditions. I'm convinced it wouldn't achieve 40 miles per gallon, and on a good run wouldn't do much better. So as I say, it's an affordable car, it's usable, and it's just a great drive. The steering is fantastic, the gear change is probably one of the best gear changes you're going to get in any road car, and all for a sum of money that, again, if you're sensible with your money, you work hard, you could afford this. Even if you if you don't need a 4-seater car, and you can only afford one car and you can live with a 2-seater, and you want something that you can use every day, the MX-5's that car. And as I say, for all those reasons, that is why the MX-5 is my number one choice for 2024. Thank you all so much for your support over the past year, especially channel members such as Davey, Scottish Car Enthusiasts and Trains TV, Ross, aka Dino Dad, Dinosaur Dad, and I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and God willing, there'll be plenty more to come in 2025. As always, comments down below, thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video, subscribe and hit the bell notification if you haven't already. And I will be catching you all on the next video. Channel members, stick around because there'll be another video for you up here. I just want to go into a deeper dive on a few more things from behind the scenes of the channel, and some of the stats of the videos that we've put out over the past 12 months. Goodbye from me, and I will catch you again very, very soon. Thank you for watching.